Jai Hind, Namaste, hello and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav and in this video we'll be discussing the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 10th of November 2020. Now for your convenience, I have added timestamps in the description. So if you want to skip to a particular news, please use those timestamps. And PDF for selected topics are available on the Telegram channel, the link to which is in the description. Also, if you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos that we post. And if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. So without wasting your time, let's get started. So starting with the Hindu, COVID-19 vaccine could be 90% effective, claims Pfizer. So I have collected all the information from the Hindu and Indian Express, including the explainer into one. So we'll be looking at it. Now I will be telling you the broad contours only, and you can read the rest from the PDF, right? So let us dig into it. So 90% effective, they are saying, right? Developed by Pfizer and Germany's BioNTech. This candidate is called BTN162B2 and they will be going for emergency use approval under Operation Warp Speed by President Trump, right? Till now, they are saying this on the basis of safety reports from 94 infections. Total 44,000 people have been enrolled in the US and 5 other countries. Now, what type of vaccine it is? It is a vaccine using the mRNA technology. So it is important to know what is this technology. It makes use of the messenger RNA molecule that tells cells what proteins to build. Now in this case, the mRNA is coded to tell the cells to recreate the spike protein of the novel coronavirus. So I will also tell you what is spike protein, and let us just look at this mRNA technology. So basically, use of mRNA technology is like computer programming. Your DNA, it stores data for instructions for proteins in the nucleus, right? Then mRNA is like a software. We send this software and it tells the cells to make a particular type of protein. In this case, we are using the spike protein. So it is a temporary set of instructions for cell to make a protein. mRNA is made using the DNA. Now this is very, very important for your prelims as well. Now protein applications, proteins from the basis of life by performing the functions required by every cell. Proteins are made using rMNA, and in this case, we are inducing spike protein or the S protein. So once the mRNA is injected into the body, the cells will use its instructions, creating copies of the spike protein, which in turn is expected to prompt the immune cells to create antibodies to fight it. Now, what is this spike protein? Now see, this is what coronavirus looks like, and its envelope is made up of 3 proteins: membrane protein, envelope protein, and the spike protein. So this is the envelope protein, right? This is the spike protein, see this red portion, and this is the membrane protein. Now we have to focus on this spike protein. So let us see, why are we focusing on spike protein? So put largely, spike protein, first it facilitates the entry of the coronavirus into the host body like animal and humans to cause infection. That is the number 1 use of the spike protein. Number 2, spike protein produces neutralizing antibodies within the body, which is body's natural immune system. So that is why we are using spike protein based mRNA vaccine. This will basically, number 1, stop the entry of the coronavirus in your body. And even if it enters the body, your body would already be having these neutralizing antibodies to fight the coronavirus. So that is why spike protein vaccine. Now, what are the advantages of mRNA vaccine? Number 1, it is synthetically developed. That means the research is less dangerous. We don't have to play with the live version of the virus. Number 2, it can be produced on a large scale based on large vats, which are called bioreactors. So there can be scaling up very fast. And number 3, quick development. It enables to develop vaccine within weeks as compared to the traditional platforms, which take months or even years to get to the preclinical stage. So these are the important points from this. Now I've explained everything that was there. Then this one, Finance Panel submits report with separate section on states' finances. The 15th Finance Commission has just submitted a report to the president. Now the president will lay it before the parliament and then it will be made public. So right now it has not been made public, and we've been discussing about Finance Commission under Article 280, formed every 5 years by the president as he deems fit. And then there are some terms of references that the president gives to the Finance Commission, right? And under Article 281, its reports are tabled, right? So what were the terms of reference this time around? See, some are usual and some are unique. So usual ones are vertical and horizontal tax devolution. Vertical tax devolution means the division of divisible pool of tax between center and states, and horizontal means division of tax within the states. Then local government grants that are given to states for augmenting the financial resources of local governments. Then disaster management grants, they are also given. Now, these are the unique ones that have been given to the Finance Commission this time around, of making a new non-lapsable fund for defense and internal security of India and how to operationalize this, number one. And number two, offering performance incentives to states to deliver on reform. So these are the unique terms of reference, right? Now the panel has come up with state-specific considerations to address the key challenges that individual states face. So it is basically catering to individual state. Original remit was to make recommendations for 2021 to this period, but it made an interim report for this period. Why? Because it said that it is difficult to make projections for 5 years because economy is slowing down after structural reforms like GST and insolvency code. Then it also reduced states' share in the divisible pool from 42% to 41% because of the dissolution of J&K as a state. Now its main report is titled as Finance Commission in COVID Times. And apart from that, it has also submitted 2 other volumes. One deals with centers' finances and the other volume is dedicated to the states. So rest you can read from the PDF, and when the report becomes public, we'll be discussing that. Now coming to page 7, lessons from Vietnam and Bangladesh. So this is a commentary by Mr. Ajay Srivastav. He is Indian Trade Service Officer, right? And his views are personal. Now he's telling us the model of Vietnam and Bangladesh, which is export-led model, and what could be the potential problems with such a model of growth and what are the lessons to be learned. So let us quickly look at it. So first he tells that the factors for Vietnam's success were an open trade policy, mainly through FTAs. Vietnam's domestic market is open to the partners' products, and the partners being India, China, EU, US. And as a matter of fact, very soon, almost 99% of the EU's products could be sold freely in Vietnam's market. Then they have a less inexpensive workforce, which is a factor in every developing country. And third, generous incentives to foreign firms. For example, Vietnam has agreed to change its domestic laws to make the country attractive to investors, and the foreign firms can now compete with local businesses. So these are the factors that led to the huge inflow of foreign investment within Vietnam. Now, what are the factors for success for Bangladesh? The most important factor is large export of apparels to EU, because Bangladesh is termed as least developed country in EU. So it gets to export at duty-free rates to EU, and the US under GSP. Again, under GSP, it is either duty-free or at very low cost or low duty that they export apparels to these countries or these blocks, right? Now, Bangladesh is smart, so it is trying to diversify its export basket, and we have been helping Bangladesh in a big way. Now he says both the countries have gained from trade, and they have gained enormously in terms of creating wealth and employment, and that has lifted millions above the poverty level in less than 2 decades. So these are the good things about this export-led model, right? Now what are the lessons to be learned? Now he says from Bangladesh we can learn that we need to support large firms for a quick turnover. Why the large firms? Because they can go for brand building, they have expertise in marketing, and they are able to meet the quality requirements, which is very, very important in international business, right? And then he says, when there is a large ecosystem of large firms, then an ecosystem of small firms also develops, which initially they act as feeders or ancillary to these large firms, and then they get big and they also convert into large firms. So from Bangladesh, the lesson is large firms. Now from Vietnam, what is the lesson to learn? That Vietnam has depended too much on export, right? And that has made it vulnerable. Why? Because Vietnam has changed domestic rules to meet the needs of investors. That is making its own domestic market vulnerable, right? Because it cannot compete on cost basis with EU or US or any other developed market. Yet most of Vietnam's exports happen in just 5 sectors. Now again, there is no diversification of its export basket. In contrast, India's exports are more diverse. Now here he introduces us to a concept called Economic Complexity Index, which ranks a country based on how diversified and complex its manufacturing export basket is. ECR rank for China is 32, India 43, and Vietnam 49, and Bangladesh 12. Now India, unlike Vietnam, important point, has a developed domestic and capital market. Now what really happens that in Vietnam, the kind of model that they are using, it is leading to overall net dollar gain. Why? Because Vietnam is importing components from different countries and they are just being assembled in Vietnam. So the actual dollar that is coming to this country is very, very small. That is what he's telling in this. You can read this in the PDF. Then he's also talking about export to GDP ratio, that should a country promote trade at the expense of other sectors. So for example, there is a trade-off. You are increasing your exports, you are signing FTAs, right? But under FTAs, you will also have to increase your imports. Now that could take a toll on your domestic industry, right? So Vietnam's export to GDP ratio is 107%. Such high dependence on exports brings dollars, but also makes a country vulnerable to global economic uncertainty. Very true. Then he says that if you compare the EGR of Vietnam to large economies or exporting countries, it is a much smaller number. Gives examples of different countries. Now he's telling that most of such countries, including India, they follow an open trade policy, but this sign balanced FTAs, which is missing in Vietnam. They restrict unfair imports, which would be difficult for Vietnam, and a healthy mix of domestic champions and MNCs, right? So he's saying while export remains a priority, it should not be pursued at the expense of other sectors of the economy. That you sign FTAs and ultimately those FTAs end up crippling your own domestic industry. So the focus should be on organic economic growth through innovation and competitiveness. And India is trying to do that through promoting innovation and lowering the cost of doing business, right? So that is what he's telling in this editorial. Good one. Then this one, the cost of clearing the air. So if you remember, we discussed yesterday that Center had announced a 4,400 crore package for this year for controlling air pollution in 102 of most polluted cities, right? But that Center only transferred half of that fund till now and is saying that rest will transfer when the states perform. It would be based on their performance, right? So first, this is what it is telling. Then what is the scale of problem? We don't really understand, right? The scale of problem is unknown. Delhi, after such a long time, has been able to establish 37 ambient air quality monitors, but it has taken a lot of time. And this has been a result of litigations and some movements, and that has cost actually the taxpayer more than the cost that Delhi would be getting through these government schemes. That is what it is saying. Then he says that most of the states which have been getting these funds are expected to spend a substantial fraction in the act of measurement only, right? So this is again a waste. For example, Maharashtra and UP, by virtue of their size, got a maximum funds, but then that fund would be used in measurement. Then they're quoting an analysis by research agencies, Carbon Copy and Respirare Living Sciences, that they found only 59 out of 120 cities had PM 2.5 data available. So basically what this means that once they don't even have the data, so how can you address the problem? And the funding that the states are getting, that funding is being used for finding out that data only. So it is not being properly used. So most of the states, they use manual machines for measuring the specified pollutants. Only 3 states had the automatic systems. Now manual to automatic, they would be shifting. Again, waste of money because it is not being used for controlling of pollution. Though measurement is important, but this should have been done before. Then talking of cleanup, the funds don't account for the trained manpower and the support system necessary for effectively maintaining the systems, and these costs are likely to be significant. Again, when they shift from mechanical to automatic and they implement a new systems, then they would have to get manpower and its maintenance. That cost should be covered, so that is not being covered. So again, the money would be used in routine things rather than for making any changes. Then he's also saying that money alone doesn't work. Why? NCR region got 600 crore rupees, but the problem is not solved. It is more about solving the behavior of people. In this case, the farmers in Punjab and Haryana, to dissuade them from using stubble burning and shifting to other methods. So this is what this is telling us. Then on page 9, new parliament building will be bigger in size and have more amenities. So there's nothing really for me to explain here. Basically, it is telling about the shape and structure and the facilities that are going to be in the new parliament building. We have already been discussing the center's deposition in the case because the case is going on in the Supreme Court, which is hoping to stall this new construction. The points that center made for this, and they said that they would be saving annually rupees 1,000 crore, right? So we've discussed all of that. Now it is telling about the features, that it will be a triangular structure. It will be using the symbols of India. The traditional and modern will be fusing that. Then it will be making sure that this new building matches the style of the old existing building so that there's no stark contrast between the two. Then it will have modern amenities. Then we discussed that they need new house because the old house was made for the unicameral legislature. Now we have a bicameral legislature and more members would be added. So the new Lok Sabha would be able to accommodate 888 members and Rajya Sabha will be able to 384. Right now, there are 550 plus 2. This is the strength. Actual strength is 545 for Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha is 245, right? So expansion would be happening after delimitation. First delimitation after 2024, right? So we will see when that happens. So this is what it is telling. Then it is talking about office spaces, ground floor PM office, then upper floor other amenities, and it will be using reinforced concrete and high grade stainless steel. So this is what it is telling. So you can read this. There's nothing for me to tell you here. I've already given you gist. Then this one, next round of talks likely this week, because the last talks, they did not produce much, but Indian side said that China has basically come down from its earlier position, but now more needs to be done because we are not going back from our position of restoring the status quo ante. That is the status that existed prior to these Chinese incursions in April. Then page 10, Punjab revokes general consent to the CBI. So Punjab joins the list of non-BJP states that have been revoking this general consent. We have discussed this general consent in detail in previous videos. 2 times we have already discussed about CBI, about general consent, about the cases CBI deals with. So you can go back and refer to them, right? Then this one, academic credit banks, degree with entry and exit options soon. Agriculture education policy for changes in 74 varsities. So let us look at it. Now again, I'll be telling you the broad contours. So this new agriculture education policy has 3 major points. Number 1, an academic credit bank, right? Number 2, degree programs. Now they'll be getting proper degrees. And number 3, there will be multiple entry and exit options for all the courses in these 74 universities. And these universities are focused on sciences, crop sciences, fisheries, veterinary, and dairy training and research. So more than 45,000 students are enrolled in these universities, and they will be getting ready for some new changes in their academic life. Now this agriculture education is already aligned with NAP. How? NAP wants to shift to a 4-year undergraduate degrees. Agricultural universities already offer that. Then NAP mentions experiential education, that is on-field experience. So under agriculture education, the varsities, they follow student ready scheme, which is Rural Entrepreneurship Awareness Development Yojana. It requires all students to undertake 6-month internship, on-field internship. Usually they take it in the 4th year. And what do they gain? Hands-on training, rural awareness, industry experience, research experience, and entrepreneurship. So that is already there before NEP, right? Now what are the challenges? So there could be 2 broad challenges. Number 1, how to make this available, this experiential learning, in multiple entry and exit system. Why? Because students usually take it in the 4th year. But if there is some student who's exiting in the 2nd year or the 3rd year, then how to provide that experiential learning? And second is how to push multidisciplinarity, because these are focused on sciences. Now role of social sciences and economics is also becoming important. So how to integrate into the existing educational system? These are the challenges that they would be facing. So this is all about this. Then this one, Suu Kyi's party claims victory. So yesterday's video we discussed about elections in Myanmar. Now they have got the majority. It was all expected. India-Maldives signed 4 MOUs to boost ties. Even in yesterday's video, we discussed about India-Maldives relations, right? So in addition to 2 MOUs for high-impact community development projects, the country signed an MOU on cooperation in sports and youth affairs. So we are also training them in cricket, and another for 100 million grant, which is part of India's 500 million package for Greater Malay Connectivity Project. I have already discussed this project with you, so you can go back and refer to these videos. And if you want to read, the details are available in the PDFs, right? This is basically a 6.5 kilometer bridge that India is making. So it will reduce the pressure on the capital Malé, and will also help in the development of the adjoining islands. These are Chinese projects and these are Indian projects, right? So this is what it is. Connect Malé to Wingili and these islands, 6.7 kilometers. Ease the pressure of the main capital Malé for commercial and residential purposes, and what all other agreements we have signed. You can read this. Then on page 12, CCI to probe Google's abuse of position. So another day, another case against Google. We've been discussing Google issue. So let us see what this is. So some secret whistleblower, they wrote a letter to CCI. On a basis of that letter, CCI is going to now conduct an inquiry against Google on 2 counts this time around. Number 1, pre-installation of Google Pay on Android OS smartphones. That is also mandatory. And use of Google Play's in-app billing as the method of payment by developers. So we have discussed this also, right? Google versus Paytm and how Paytm came up with its own mini app store. Now what is the problem? That Google is charging a 30% commission on any payment through this GPay. Now it would have been okay had Google given choice to the app developers. Now it has made it mandatory for app developers to use this in-app billing system, and then they have to pay 90% commission. All the more because 90% of the downloads of Play Store happen on this Google only, right? So this whole ecosystem is owned by Google. So it is abusing its dominant position. It is basically telling the app developers, either you take it or leave it. And 30% commission is the highest in the world. Nowhere does it charge this much of commission, right? So these are the reasons why CCI is going to conduct inquiry against Google. It is breach of Section 4 of the Competition Act, right? So this is all that is. I've given you stuff. You can read it from the PDFs, right? Now, in what other instances CCI has taken action against Google? So in 2018, there was a search bias in flight operations and CCI fined Google for rupees 136 crore. Now Google has appealed against it. So that case is pending. In June 2019, again, it abused its dominant position in domestic smartphone market, restricting choice for UI and Android, right? Again, in October 2020, we've discussed these cases earlier as well. Android-based television market, again, making barriers for companies to use of Android OS. And if you remember, India is not the only country. They are engaged in battle in EU, and we've also discussed in detail their battle in the US regarding this, right? So this is all this is. Now, rest of the things I have provided in the PDFs, you can read it. I've just told you a summary of this, right? Now coming to the Indian Express, first time since border standoff, Modi ji on one platform. So they are going to meet virtually on the platform of SCO, right? So this is what it is telling. And it is also telling how in the history, whenever they've had a sort of a meeting, then that has led to resolving of problems. So in 2017, nearly 3 months long, Doklam border standoff was resolved just ahead of the BRICS summit. In September 2017 in Xiamen, the Chumar border standoff in September 2014 was also resolved after Modi raised issue with visiting Chinese president in Ahmedabad. So let us hope now this issue gets solved in this meet. Then we've already discussed this in detail. We have discussed this in detail. I've put everything in that PDF you can read, and I've told you about the broad contours. Then this one, an experiment to grow saffron in Sikkim with help from J&K. So till now, saffron has been grown in J&K only, right? There are some particular districts where it was grown. Now Ministry of Science and Technology, through Department of Science and Technology, it undertook a pilot project for growing saffron in Sikkim, and it has proved to be successful, right? So they'll be going for scaling up of that operation. So the successful results were possible in the Yangyang village of South Sikkim. It was grown across 1,000 square kilometers. Now it would be scaled up to 10 times in Sikkim itself after assessing the quality, right? And it was done by Nectar, which is an autonomous body under the Department of Science and Technology, right? Now, till now, it has been restricted to limited geographical area in J&K, mainly Pampore, followed by Budgam, Srinagar and Kishtwar districts. And the region where it is grown are known as Karewa formations. You can get to know about Karevas in your NCERT Geography class 10. So please make it a point you read your NCERTs. Then just the headline, Eye on Joint Clinical Trials, India training nations in South Asia. So India is hoping that when vaccine becomes available or there is a promising candidate in stage 3, then we can go for joint trials in different nations in South Asia. So we are training their teams. So this is what it is telling. Then explainer, we have discussed everything. The only part was missing, that was, will India get access to vaccine? No, as of now, because India has not signed a deal with the company Pfizer, right? Pfizer has signed deals with countries like US, UK, Japan and EU. There was an initial meeting between Indian representatives and the representatives of Pfizer. They even came down, but no concrete deal has been made. Now, what could be the major roadblocks? Now, this vaccine has to be stored at temperatures below -90 Fahrenheit. So it would require an ultra cold storage system, which is something that India is lacking, right? So we have to be prepared for these cold storage systems. And if you remember, we have been making our plans for augmenting our cold storage system. So let us hope that we are able to handle this and we are able to ramp up our cold storage facilities. Then this one, a step forward in promise of ultra fast hyperloops. So what are hyperloops? We'll quickly look at them, right? And how are they relevant for India? So Virgin became the first company to complete first manned test of hyperloop technology. There are two big players in this field. One is Virgin and other is Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk is also trying to build his hyperloop technology. Now hyperloop is touted as the fifth mode of transportation. So this is basically what it is. It will be a tube. It will have a fan, it will work in vacuum, and it will be based on magnetic levitation. Magnetic levitation would mean that there is no friction on the tires or on the track, and this fan would basically suck in all the air and push it back. So this will provide it the thrust, and because it is in vacuum, so there will be no air resistance. So this is how it will be working. You can read this, nothing rocket science about this. See, this is what it is. Compressor sucks air in to pull the pod forward. Enclosed tube in ultra low pressure to minimize air resistance. Magnetic levitation system powers pods. Braking energy is used to recharge batteries, right? And it has a very high potential speed. For example, from New York to Washington DC, you could be reaching in 29 minutes, and LA to San Francisco, East Coast to West Coast, 35 minutes. So it would be a very revolutionary development. Now, Virgin tested this, right? So what does it mean? It is a safety milestone and it is symbolically important. Now let us see if it becomes a scaled up technology. Again, this is about this. You can read, nothing rocket science, right? And Hyperloop to be built in India in 38 months. Again, India has a contract with Virgin. So this is going to be Hyperloop in India from Mumbai to Pune. This is how it's going to look, and it will cut down the time to 25 minutes, which at present by car takes 2.5 hours and by train takes 3+ hours. So this is going to happen in India within next 38 months. Let us hope we get this infrastructure. So folks, that is all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel. Also press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos, and please give us a thumbs up if you liked our videos. Also, connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone, and please connect with us on our Telegram page where you can access the PDFs of the videos that I'll be posting daily, right? So see you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe, and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.